Hey, Travis here. Welcome to another video on ESL Explorer. Currently, I'm taking a class on cultural diversity, and we read a book called Other People's Children by Lisa Delpit. Perhaps you've read it too. I thought it was a very profound book, and it got me interested in the whole topic. The whole class has been awesome to me. So I went out and looked at some other books and other materials, and today we're going to run through 3 of these materials, 2 books and a review of another book. And I'm going to give you some tips on what I think being an inclusive teacher means. First, to really understand these concepts, these tips I'm going to give you, you probably need to know the authors a little bit about their background and where they're coming from, so that you can kind of frame the stuff that I'm saying. And you definitely need to try to remember their names, because I'm going to name drop and probably try to connect, the 3 people together in one concept at times, and then other times I'll just focus solely on one of them or 2. So that's what you're in store for. I hope you enjoy, and more importantly, I hope you comment below and say anything you want to about being an inclusive teacher, cultural diversity, and just being a good person. First, let's talk about Lisa, the woman that wrote the book for my class. Like I said, I thought it was a great book, and actually in the book she kind of sums up who she is as a person pretty well. So here's a direct quote from her. I'll just read this section from the book. I have come to some of those understandings. And here she's talking about understanding how to educate poor and black students. I've come to some of those understandings through my own attempts to understand my place in this country as an African American woman. I am the offspring of a teacher in a colored high school in pre-integration Louisiana, and a man who received his GED diploma in his 40th year, only to die of kidney failure at the age of 47, because the colored ward was not permitted to use the dialysis machine. I am the frightened teenager who was part of the first wave of black students to integrate hostile white high schools. I am the college student of the 1970s whose political and ethical perspectives were developed against the backdrop of the struggle for black liberation and the war in Vietnam. I am the panicked mother of a 5-year-old soon to enter an urban public school system where I can no longer buffer her from damaging perspectives. I am the teacher of many diverse students, from African American toddlers to Papua New Guinean preschoolers, and from Hispanic middle schoolers to European American college students to Native Alaskan teachers. Now, not only is that a mouthful, but it really sheds some light on how much struggle this woman has been through in her life, how much racially charged situation she's been in. And despite all that, when I read this book, quick overview, I just sensed this love, despite several people. She says that in the book that several people kind of take it as a hostile kind of thing, like she's attacking them because, I guess they can't see her honesty as just her being honest. It's not attacking, I don't think. I really felt a lot of love and just like kind of, hey, look, I wanted to take up a hand with her and, join the fight against the system, because that's what I was seeing. After looking at Lisa's book and getting through that, I was pretty hungry for some more material, so I decided to look around, and I came upon Ruby Payne's book. It's called A Framework for Understanding Poverty. And the comments that I read about this book were really all over the place. A lot of people were against it. And although I kind of was curious, it didn't seem like the right book for me. I didn't really want to go with that one. And so I saw another comment where somebody said, "Hey, Bell Hooks, that's the better book," you know. And then I read a little bit about Bell Hooks and read some comments about this book that she wrote called "Teaching to Transgress: Education as the Practice of Freedom." And that's the book that I ended up getting. So let's talk about Bell Hooks for a second, because she has a very interesting history as well. In her book, she talks a lot about personal experience, and actually she's an advocate for personal experience. We'll get to that, but basically she was one of the first people to integrate into an all-white high school in her neighborhood. So you can imagine what kind of feelings and just crazy situations that would bring about. She talks about going, and she had a best friend that was a white boy. So at that time, that was really strange, let alone a boy, but then a white boy, and she's a teenager, and she talks about being invited to his house and how they made a friendship and what she thought about that friendship. I really, really enjoyed her perspective. She's definitely edgy. She's a little bit more edgy. She's a little bit more stingy than Lisa. The way she presented her material, I could see how people could get kind of upset. And some of the comments about her book were also the same, like kind of upset. Where the person that read it just kind of took it personally. I don't know if that's her intent. I think she's just trying to be honest. That's what I was getting out of it. And I think a lot of these people that write on cultural diversity are just being honest. This is the way they see it from their point of view, and I don't think it's anything to get offended by. I wasn't offended. It just kind of seemed like she was angry a lot. But it kind of fits in line with her whole philosophy, which that was what I got from the book. One of her philosophies was, to change something, you need confrontation. There's going to be confrontation, and this is kind of like a philosophy in her class. It's like making people a little bit uncomfortable, and then they learn from that. And in the end, maybe, in the beginning, maybe it's uncomfortable, but in the end, in the long run, they're going to learn something very profound. And she mentions that about a lot of her students. So this is where she's kind of coming from, and I'll share some of her views. The last person is Ruby Payne. I mentioned her a second ago because I kind of found her before Bell Hooks, but I didn't read her book. I actually used her as another assignment where we had to read a journal article. And the journal article I read actually was critically reviewing her book for truth statements, whether or not what she was saying is true or not. Her book, hang on. A Framework for Understanding Poverty. Her book has been criticized a ton. She self-published, and she didn't get it like peer-reviewed like a lot of academia wants you to do. And so a lot of people are just saying that she pretty much stereotypically did a lot of these things, and where did she get this information? And so those are some of the comments that I read about her. But in this review of her work, they also kind of come to the same conclusions, that she just didn't support her work. And they term it deficit thinking, where she kind of she presents people in a deficit that are in poverty. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. But I don't want to, since I didn't read her book, I can't really go into that too much. I'm just going to go into what these people that did the study thought after reading her book, the review that I read. It did give me some interesting ideas, especially this deficit thinking idea. So we'll touch on that. All right, I hope you enjoy these little tips. Please, again, comment below or leave a message and tell me what you're thinking or what books you've read, because I'm super interested in this. Being an ESL teacher, we need these kinds of ideas. We need to be more understanding. Just being a human, you need to be more understanding. So I hope these tips help you out, and I hope that nobody takes this the wrong way. It is a touchy subject, and I don't feel like people talk about things like this enough anymore, because they're kind of afraid of what other people will think. I'm not afraid, but I hope I don't offend anybody. So anyway, here are some tips. Check it out. Lesson number 1 from all those beautiful words, quite simple thing poked through. Teacher material for diversity needs to be diverse. In a perfect world where we all share experiences, perhaps it would be possible for us to actually have friends from all walks of life. Unfortunately, it seems like we kind of segregate ourselves naturally in these neighborhoods, in these cocoons of wealth and other different factors that kind of block us off into little districts. So obviously we need some kind of training when we all come together. How do we come together and, get along? Hooks touches on this a little bit. You can feel the bridge when she talks about how she was searching out material as a black woman, and she was looking at feminist materials, and she couldn't find any writing really that reflected the perspective of a black female. There were certain books that were saying things, but really where they were coming from was a black male's perspective, or the feminist side was coming from a white feminist approach. And so that got her thinking, and actually she wrote a book kind of geared that way. With that kind of segregation within literature, it's not a big jump to imagine that the training materials used for diversity could also be suffering from some kind of racial bias. Who's choosing these? Are they truly reflective of the people, the audience that they're meant to help? A great example of this is Ruby Payne's work. Ruby Payne's book, by many, and the article that I read that critically reviewed it, the book is viewed as somewhat stereotyping and really painting a kind of negative picture of people in poverty. Yet, this book became the central piece of literature used in professional development programs in 38 states, according to the article. And this was kind of fueled by the No Child Left Behind movement. Over 800,000 copies sold for this book, and it hadn't been peer reviewed. It was self-published. What happened here? That just seems like a huge mistake. If I'm gonna sit here and spout off about having diverse material be diverse, I can't really say that Ruby Payne's book shouldn't be used. But I have to wonder, isn't there a better source as the central piece of information? Surely a combination of stuff could be used, and her book could supplement that, because some of the people in my class were saying they read it and they got some good information from it. So there is something going on there, but I just don't get it. Why is this the central piece to the puzzle? And we have to swing back and kind of think, are we representing the people we're trying to help? Delpit touches on this quite a bit when she has a chapter in her book that talks about Papua New Guinea and their literary program, the history of it. And in the beginning of the program, they're struggling and nothing's working. And then after years and years of struggling, they finally get the bright idea to talk to the parents and get ideas from them and see what they want out of the education program. Well, they did, and it improved dramatically. All of this really swivels around a huge idea, a huge takeaway for me from this class and this reading, and that is that we have to serve and know who we're serving. We have to serve those people well, and we have to know what they need well. It's about thinking about them instead of us. Certainly, training material for cultural diversity needs to be diverse so that we can serve those needs to the best of our ability and include everybody that needs to be included. Deficit thinking. This is a concept that I learned in the Payne article, Ruby Payne article. And this was like the main critique that the authors had come to, where basically they're saying, Payne has painted this picture of poverty that's kind of like causing an us versus them mindset. It's painting them in a negative light, and take this with a grain of salt because I haven't read the book. But when I read this article that critiqued the book, I just thought, man, this is not the way to go about being inclusive. How is this going to help anybody? Of course, you could say like having the knowledge of these things could help you, and maybe you didn't think about that, or maybe you didn't know how serious the problem was. But I mean, consider this example. I think we all know that if you had an abusive father that drank all the time and beat you, you'd have problems at school. Wouldn't you know that? So how does that really help? The knowledge of that doesn't really do much. What you need to do is talk to that student and get some help for them. Be a friend. Give them an outlet to get rid of all that pain. That would be more helpful, wouldn't it? So this is kind of going to go back to something, or it'll touch on something I'm going to touch on later in the video. I'm going to touch on it right now. And that's, be compassionate, be a human. This deficit thinking idea that supposedly the whole book kind of illuminates to, it's terrible. It's terrible. Lesson 3, the power of personal experience. I often say to my students, I'll ask them a question, I'll be like, who is the teacher? I teach young kids mostly. I teach elementary and middle school kids. And usually they kind of look at me like, what are you, stupid? And then they'll say, you're the teacher, Travis. And at first I think they think it's like a authoritative ploy, like, who's the teacher? But the reason I ask this question is because my answer is, we're all the teachers and we're all students. We're all teachers, we're all students. And I don't know if they kind of get that because they're ESL students, but I'm hoping that it sinks through to a few of them. I do explain a little bit, and I say, like, I can learn from you, you can learn from me. It doesn't matter about age. And I think that's a big thing here in Korea, a big thing I want to teach, because age is so oppressive here. If you're older in Korea, that's such a power. So this idea, that anybody's personal experience could change us and we could learn from it, I think is very powerful. And so I was disturbed when I read some accounts from Hooks and Delpit about how they feel personal experience has been oppressed within education. Delpit touches on this a bit. I think she was training teachers in Alaska, and she noticed that, other people that were teaching or training teachers, they were kind of like not listening to these native folks who were in the program. They were not listening to their experiences, and they kind of like shoving them aside. Oh, that doesn't matter. No. What you need to do is focus on, this famous theorist or this famous idea or concept. Your experience. Oh no, and they were kind of sidestepping it. That's what she was getting, because she interviewed some of the teachers, and that's the feelings that they presented towards her. I thought that was really, really terrible. And also quite interesting that, It's funny. It's funny that that's the way it is, because these days it seems like everybody's into this, system idea. Like, oh, this system's so great, we can use this and it'll solve all these problems and blah 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 blah. And this also kind of speaks to it in a way. Like, it's not about systems; it's about people. Hooks touches on it too. She kind of talks about how she uses personal narratives in her class and wants to give her students a voice, and how important that is for them to get a chance to say their piece, and building a community using this. And man, it just sounds so great, so great. I've been thinking about how I can do this a little bit more in my classes, so that everybody's included and they get to feel like they're an expert by using their own personal experiences and relating it to the material. And that's one caution that Hooks actually went into, is like, when she began doing this, a lot of people didn't know how to direct it, and so it came off as, oh, you're just chatting about anything in class, huh? That sounds not right. That's what the other professors or teachers were kind of judging her, the way they were judging her. And so, yeah, it needs to be used correctly, but it could be a powerful tool. Lesson 4, kind of building on this idea of having a voice and using personal narratives. Hooks goes into, and I mean, it's in the title of her book, using education as freedom, or education as the practice of freedom, she terms it. This is like pretty much the big concept in her book. It is in the title, and it's throughout the whole thing. She really hit it home. I feel like it's just a cool concept, and it's so simple, but it's something that's kind of difficult for teachers to accept. The book was published in 1995, so yeah, maybe at that time even it's still difficult. I think even today it's still difficult. She makes the point that, in class, teachers and students should both be learning and both be wanting and passionate about getting more and more and more. And if that's happening, then you will build a community that's awesome. Through sharing these personal experiences, you can do that. And also, she kind of hints at the fact that you need to kind of give more choice and kind of be flexible with the direction of the material. I wonder if Hooks would deem standardized testing and teaching to the test as education as freedom. If you didn't catch the sarcasm in that, I don't know what to do for you. You got to read the book. This thing with standardized testing these days, and the whole idea of it, is just totally backwards to me, and I love that this juxtaposes that so much. I feel like we need a lot more freedom to do what the kids want to do, and of course it takes an experienced hand to be able to maneuver on the spot like that, but it can produce some amazing results. Also, down in the show notes, I've included a link to an article which discusses some very interesting teachers throughout the world who kind of let their students direct the class. And the results that they got were amazing. Lesson 5, the confrontational nature of change. This is something that I kind of gleaned from Hooks. I don't know if I totally agree, and I'll kind of get to that at the end of this, but she goes into, and I mentioned this before, how she had a relationship with a white boy, and at the time that was quite strange. She was in high school, and he invited her over for dinner, and her feelings towards this, and how courageous she thought he was at the time. And I'll agree with that. That's awesome. Going against the grain, as she puts it, is what people need to do sometimes. I'll agree with that. But I don't know if doing it the way it came off in the book, it just seemed a little bit it made me think of violence in a way. I don't think she meant that, but I feel like it needs an added little asterisk of, go against the grain, but try to be smooth about it. And that's where I think we're headed. I hope we're headed. How can we be smooth about these issues and kind of navigate them without hurting people's feelings and wording it in a very correct and humanistic way? I don't think it's always possible right on the first get-go. That's why I think there should be some kind of system for handling these types of things. Kind of in line with this, later in the book, she talks about how, in her class, she'll push people to be a little bit uncomfortable, and then, later they'll come back to her after the class is over and say things like, wow, you really changed my life, but at the time I hated it. And so she kind of gets on this idea of, learning is not always an instant pleasure. Students need to realize that, there's joy in hard work, and it takes some effort to get to a state of pleasure. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I agree to a certain extent on this one as well. But, I like to keep things as smooth as I can in my class. And I tend to think I'm kind of, I've started out my career as a teacher as more like an entertainer. And now I'm kind of going in a different direction, kind of mixing more theory and other things with it. So, I run the idea of let's keep things light and fun if we can. And this doesn't exactly sound like that, although she didn't give examples, so it's kind of hard for me to envision. Just going back to her, personal narrative example, I'm sure some people are uncomfortable to talk with other people, and maybe that's one of the points, or they're uncomfortable to talk about certain topics, and maybe that's the point she's trying to make, sometimes you got to be uncomfortable. And I would agree with that if that's where she was going, because I try to put myself in uncomfortable situations all the time. I feel it's good for you, just to feel out of your element, and it makes you more ready for the future because you never know what's going to come your way. So if that's what she meant, I'm on board. But I was kind of on the edge just because it kind of came off as, radical change, confrontation. And I don't think, probably it's not meant that way, but I have to throw that caveat for this one. Finally, point number 6, and we're done. The individual. So, this is my big takeaway and my crowning achievement of all this reading and exercise of the mind. The individual. We got to think about the individual, and I think I've learned this at my current position. My boss really does a good job of allowing us to change the curriculum to fit the class. He always says teach the student, not to the curriculum. And I hope, I wonder, are all places like this? No. And they should be, because it's those people that matter, If you're allowed to go into McDonald's and get a burger any way you want, no onions, extra ketchup, whatever, then certainly you should be able to have some choice about what you are studying and how you are doing it. And we are just here to we as teachers, we're just here to kind of help you in that direction that you want to go. Isn't that what it's supposed to be? But as I mentioned before, you can kind of sense my angst against standardized testing and these kinds of things. I do think we need tests, but that whole let's get ready for this exam, it just doesn't seem to be in tune with this, does it? as I said, Hooks kind of mentions this when she says, like the teacher and the student should be learning at the same time. It's about us as individuals and our students as individuals. And if there's a healthy exchange going on where everybody gets a little something, then the community is going to be happy and you're going to have a good class. Delpit has a really nice quote that I'm going to throw at you. Check it out. In any discussion of education and culture, it is important to remember that children are individuals and cannot be made to fit into any preconceived mold of how they are supposed to act. The question is not necessarily how to create the perfect cultural matched learning situation for each ethnic group, but rather how to recognize when there is a problem for a particular child and how to seek its cause in the most broadly conceived fashion. I love that quote. It just really hammers it home. A system is a system and people are people. It's totally different. We have to be the bridge in between there. Yes, we need these systems, but we've got to be there to tailor it to our learners and be a servant leader to them. Be thinking about what they need, not how we want to push them to go to a certain area. Or how do we help do this? Hooks touches on this, and so does Delpit. And basically, the gist of it is that they get at is be passionate and be a real person. Hooks has a chapter where she kind of talks about the eroticism of learning, and it's erotic. And of course, you're gonna think something different when you hear the word erotic, but what she's getting at is you should have a passion for what you're doing, and if you have that, it's contagious and people can really sense it. Do you really have a passion? Do you? And if not, I think you need to figure out how to ignite it again, right? Part of it is admitting that you don't have it, reflecting on yourself, but getting there also takes a plan. So it's kind of interesting, this concept of the individual. It's such an easy concept, but I feel like it's overlooked quite a bit. So that's it. Those are my tips for how to make an inclusive learning experience. Oh, now you know how to do it all, right? No, sorry. It takes a lot more than that. But I hope that by watching this video, it helped somebody. And again, comment below. Look at the links below. That one article that I mentioned before about teachers kind of allowing freedom within the learning space. Awesome article. You must read it. Also, if you want to pass this information on, I've included the pamphlet link to this material as well. Read Delpit's book, read these different books, Payne's book, Hooks' book. It's all good. I can't speak to Payne's, okay? But the other two, really good. I enjoyed it. And, it's about getting your mind thinking more than anything. It's not really about an opinion. Well, I like this, like that. If you don't like something, sometimes that's even better because it kind of gets you thinking even more because you want to fight it. So read Payne's book. If the authors are correct, then that might be the way it goes. But get active.